Betrayed by his own family, the richest man in the region was thrown unconscious into the waters of a remote river. A poor girl appeared along the way, searching for cans to survive. Seeing him adrift, she jumped into the water and saved him with the courage of someone who has no one but herself. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The icy waters of the Willamette River churned relentlessly as Robert Blackwood's unconscious body drifted with the current. The early morning fog hung low over Portland, Oregon, shrouding the riverbanks in a ghostly veil. His once pristine charcoal suit was now sodden and torn. His distinguished silver-streaked hair matted against his pale forehead. Just hours earlier, he had been the undisputed titan of the Pacific Northwest's tech industry, CEO of Blackwood Innovations, with a fortune that made him the wealthiest man in the region. Now he floated helplessly downstream, the victim of an elaborate betrayal orchestrated by those he'd trusted most. The family meeting at his riverside estate was supposed to be routine, quarterly reports, future projections, nothing that warranted concern. His younger brother Thomas had called the gathering, citing urgent business matters that couldn't wait. "The board has concerns, Robert," Thomas had said, his voice eerily calm. "Your leadership decisions lately have been questionable." Robert had scoffed at the accusation. "Questionable? We've increased profits by 28% this quarter alone." "It's not about profits," Thomas countered. "It's about direction, about legacy." The argument escalated rapidly. When Robert turned to pour himself a drink, trying to calm his nerves, he felt a sharp blow to the back of his head. The last thing he remembered before darkness claimed him was his brother's cold voice. "I'm sorry it came to this." Miles downstream from the Blackwood estate, 10-year-old Sadie Miller followed her usual morning routine. With a tattered backpack slung over her small shoulders, she scoured the riverbanks for recyclables, aluminum cans, glass bottles, anything that might bring in a few dollars to help her ailing mother afford medication for her chronic illness. Sadie's life had never been easy. Her father had abandoned them 3 years ago, leaving her mother to raise 3 children while battling debilitating migraines that often left her bedridden. As the oldest, Sadie had stepped up, becoming the family's primary provider despite her tender age. She attended school during the day and collected recyclables in the early mornings and evenings. The morning was particularly cold for late spring, and Sadie's thin jacket offered little protection against the biting chill. Still, she persisted, her eyes scanning the shoreline for the telltale glint of metal or glass among the river debris. That's when she spotted something unusual caught against a fallen tree, something dark and large. Definitely not a discarded soda can. Curious, she approached cautiously, her worn sneakers squelching in the mud. A gasp escaped her lips when she realized what, or rather who, she was looking at. A fair man in an expensive suit lay half submerged in the water, his face deathly pale. "Mister?" she called out tentatively. "Mister, are you okay?" When he didn't respond, panic surged through her small body. Without hesitation, she dropped her backpack and waded into the frigid water. Despite her size, years of carrying her younger siblings and hauling bags of recyclables had given her surprising strength. She grabbed the man's shoulders and, with tremendous effort, dragged him toward the shore. On dry land, she shook him gently. "Please wake up, mister, please." Robert Blackwood coughed violently, water spilling from his lungs. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing disoriented hazel eyes that struggled to focus on the small, concerned face hovering above him. "What? Where am I?" he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "You're by the river," Sadie explained, relief evident in her voice. "I found you in the water. You weren't moving." Robert attempted to sit up but winced as pain shot through his head. Memory fragments began surfacing. The meeting, Thomas's accusations, the unexpected blow. "Thank you," he managed, studying his unlikely savior. A skinny girl with determined brown eyes and a practical ponytail, dressed in clothes that had clearly seen better days. "What's your name?" Sadie Miller." She handed him her water bottle, a reused plastic container she'd refilled that morning. "You should drink something." Robert accepted it gratefully, taking small sips. "I'm Robert Blackwood," he said, watching for recognition. It came immediately. Sadie's eyes widened. "Like the Blackwood building downtown?" The tech company? He nodded grimly. The very same. What happened to you? Sadie asked, her perception far beyond her years. Did someone hurt you? Should I call for help? Robert considered his situation carefully. If Thomas had gone to such lengths to remove him, he'd surely have a cover story in place. The authorities might already be looking for him, not to help, but to finish what his brother had started. No police, he said firmly. No hospitals. I can't trust anyone right now. Sadie nodded with surprising understanding. You need somewhere safe to go. It wasn't a question. Can you walk? With Sadie's assistance, Robert managed to stand, though he towered over his young rescuer. Together they made slow progress away from the riverbank, following a narrow trail that wound through a small wooded area, separating the river from a run-down neighborhood. Where are we going? Robert asked, each step sending waves of pain through his head. I know a place, Sadie replied confidently. An old house that's been empty for months. The owners moved away and no one's bought it yet. I go there sometimes when I need to be alone. After a difficult 20-minute journey, they reached a small, dilapidated house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. True to Sadie's word, the back door was unlocked, revealing a dusty interior with minimal furniture, an old couch, a rickety table with mismatched chairs, and a few forgotten items left behind by the previous owners. You can stay here, Sadie said, helping Robert to the couch. No one ever comes around. As Robert settled onto the worn cushions, the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. His brother had orchestrated a coup, had physically attacked him, and had left him to disappear from the face of the earth. By now, Thomas would be telling the board that Robert had suffered a breakdown, or perhaps had taken an unexpected sabbatical, anything to explain his sudden absence while Thomas seized control of the company. I need to think, Robert muttered, running a hand through his damp hair. Sadie returned from exploring the kitchen, carrying a glass of water. The water still works, she announced proudly. Thank you, Sadie, you've been extraordinary. Robert's voice softened as he regarded the child. In his world of corporate sharks and cutthroat negotiations, such selfless kindness was rare. Sadie sat cross-legged on the floor, studying him with unchildlike intensity. So what really happened? Why were you in the river? Robert hesitated. How much should he tell this child? And yet she had already shown more loyalty than his own flesh and blood. Someone I trusted betrayed me, he said finally. My brother wants to take over my company. He arranged for me to have an accident. Sadie didn't seem shocked. Adults can be mean sometimes, she said with the simple wisdom of a child who had seen too much. My dad left when I was 7, said he was going to the store and never came back. The straightforward way she stated this painful truth struck Robert deeply. Here he was, lamenting betrayal from within his empire of wealth and privilege, while this child had been abandoned and forced to grow up far too quickly. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said sincerely. Sadie shrugged. It's okay. I take care of Mom and my brother and sister now. Mom tries, but she gets really bad headaches, and Jason has asthma, and Emma is only 5. That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age, Robert observed. Someone has to do it, Sadie replied matter-of-factly. She stood up. I should go. Mom will worry if I'm gone too long. Do you need anything else? Robert considered his situation. He had no phone, no wallet, no way to contact anyone he might still trust. Could you come back later? I need to figure out what to do next. Sadie nodded. I'll bring you some food. And maybe some dry clothes. You can't stay in that wet suit. As she turned to leave, Robert called after her. Sadie, why are you helping me? You don't even know me. The girl paused in the doorway, her small silhouette framed against the morning light. Because it's the right thing to do, she said simply. And maybe someday someone will help me too when I need it. After she left, Robert lay back on the couch, his mind racing despite his exhaustion. Before the confrontation, he had sensed something might happen. Thomas had been behaving strangely for weeks, having secretive meetings, changing the subject whenever Robert entered the room. So Robert had taken precautions. 3 days earlier, he had gathered crucial documents, original contracts, financial records that would prove irregularities if Thomas tried to take control, and a small collection of family heirlooms, and hidden them where no one would think to look. Behind the old Sunoco gas station on Riverside Drive, beneath an ancient oak tree marked with 3 white stones, he had buried a waterproof bag containing everything he would need to prove his identity and reclaim what was rightfully his. But in his current condition, he couldn't retrieve it himself. And he couldn't trust anyone associated with his former life, anyone except perhaps the remarkable child who had pulled him from the river without a second thought. As he drifted into an exhausted sleep, Robert Blackwood, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and commanded boardrooms with a mere glance, realized that his fate now rested in the hands of a 10-year-old girl from the wrong side of town. And somehow, that thought gave him more comfort than he could have imagined. Robert awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Dust particles danced in the rays of afternoon sunlight, streaming through the cracked windows of the abandoned house. His head throbbed, and his clothes were still damp. The events of the morning came rushing back: Thomas's betrayal, the river, and the unexpected rescue by a remarkable child. He checked his watch, a waterproof Rolex that had somehow survived his ordeal. Nearly 4 hours had passed since Sadie left. Robert attempted to stand, fighting through waves of dizziness. His legs felt stronger now, though his body ached from the trauma it had endured. He made his way to the kitchen, where he found a chipped mug and filled it with tap water. As he sipped the metallic tasting liquid, Robert assessed his situation with the analytical precision that had made him a business legend. Thomas had clearly been planning this coup for months, maybe longer. The board meeting scheduled for Monday would surely formalize the transition of power. With Robert conveniently incapacitated or taking a stress leave, his absence would be explained away, and by the time anyone grew suspicious, Thomas would have consolidated his position. The sound of the back door opening interrupted his thoughts. Robert tensed, ready to flee, but relaxed when Sadie's small form appeared in the doorway. "You're awake," she observed, dropping a plastic grocery bag on the table. "I brought you some things." Robert watched as she unpacked her offerings: a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in a paper towel, an apple, a bottle of water, and a faded grey t-shirt with Portland Trail Blazers emblazoned across the front. "The shirt was my dad's," Sadie explained. "He left it behind. It'll be big on you, but it's dry." "Thank you," Robert said, genuinely moved by her thoughtfulness. "You didn't have to do all this." Sadie shrugged. "Did you figure out what you're going to do?" Robert hesitated before answering. "I did, actually. But I need your help with something important." Sadie tilted her head, waiting for him to continue. Before the incident, I suspected something might happen. So I hid some things. Important documents, proof of what's mine, some valuable items. I need to get them back." "Where did you hide them?" Sadie asked. "Behind the Sunoco gas station on Riverside Drive, under an oak tree marked with 3 white stones. There's a waterproof bag buried about a foot deep." Sadie nodded slowly. "I know that place. It's not far from where I found you." "I can't go myself," Robert admitted. "My brother might have people looking for me, but no one would notice a child digging in the dirt." "I can go," Sadie said confidently. "I'll get your bag." Robert studied her face, struck again by her unusual maturity. "It might be dangerous," he warned. "If anyone sees you digging there—" "No one will see me," Sadie assured him. "I'm good at not being noticed when I don't want to be. That's how I find the best recycling spots." After changing into the Blazers t-shirt, which hung on his frame like a tent, Robert ate the sandwich Sadie had brought. It was a simple meal, but at that moment, it tasted better than any of the gourmet dinners he'd enjoyed in 5-star restaurants. "Tell me about your family," he said as they shared the apple, cutting it with a pocket knife Sadie produced from her backpack. Sadie's eyes softened. "Mom works at the Stop and Save when she's feeling okay. She used to be a nurse before her migraines got really bad. Jason's 8, and he likes dinosaurs and science. Emma's 5 and already knows how to read better than most of her kindergarten class." "And your father?" Robert asked gently. Sadie's expression hardened slightly. "He worked at the lumber mill until it closed down. Then he started drinking a lot. One day he just didn't come home. That must have been hard on all of you." "It was harder on Mom," Sadie said pragmatically. "I already knew how to take care of things." Robert felt a pang of something unfamiliar, perhaps shame, perhaps admiration. This child had shouldered responsibilities that would crush most adults, and she did it without complaint. "What about you?" Sadie asked. "Do you have kids?" Robert shook his head. "I was always too busy building my company. I have an ex-wife, Caroline. We divorced 5 years ago. No children. That's sad," Sadie said simply. "Is it?" Robert had never thought of it that way before. His life had been defined by achievement, not personal connections. "I suppose it is." As afternoon gave way to evening, they finalized their plan. Sadie would go to the oak tree early the next morning, retrieve the bag and bring it back to the house. Then they would examine the contents together and decide on their next move. "I should head home," Sadie said, standing. "Mom will be wondering where I've been all day." "What will you tell her?" Robert asked. "That I found good recycling spots," Sadie replied with a small smile. "It's not a lie." After Sadie left, Robert stretched out on the couch again, his mind turning over the events that had led to his current situation. Thomas had always been ambitious, but Robert had never imagined his brother would resort to such extremes. What had changed? What had pushed him over the edge? Then it hit him, the Peterson acquisition. 3 months ago, Robert had finalized a deal to acquire Peterson Technologies, a small but innovative firm developing cutting-edge AI systems. Thomas had vehemently opposed the move, arguing that the technology was unproven and the price too steep. But Robert had seen the potential, the way Peterson's AI could revolutionize their entire product line. The board had backed Robert, much to Thomas's visible frustration. And 2 weeks later, Peterson's prototype had exceeded all expectations during internal testing, validating Robert's vision. The company's stock had surged, and analysts were predicting Blackwood Innovations would dominate the market for years to come. That must have been the final straw for Thomas, watching his older brother succeed yet again, proving him wrong yet again. His entire life, Thomas had lived in Robert's shadow, always the less successful, less visionary brother. The Peterson deal had simply made that reality unbearable. Robert sighed, feeling a complex mix of anger and pity. Thomas had always been his own worst enemy, too focused on comparing himself to others instead of finding his own path. And now that insecurity had driven him to betray his own brother. Morning came too slowly for Robert, who had slept fitfully, troubled by dreams of falling into endless cold water. He paced the small house, watching the sun rise through the dirty windows, waiting anxiously for Sadie's return. At precisely 7:15 a.m., he heard the back door creak open. Sadie entered, her face flushed with exertion and triumph, a mud-covered package clutched in her small hands. "I found it," she announced breathlessly. "Right where you said it would be." Robert felt a surge of relief as he took the waterproof bag from her. His hands trembled slightly as he unzipped it, revealing the contents: a manila envelope containing original corporate documents, USB drives with financial records, his passport, a significant amount of cash, and a small velvet pouch containing his mother's jewelry. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sadie, you've saved me twice now." She beamed at the praise, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Was it what you needed?" "Yes," Robert confirmed, thumbing through the documents. "Everything I need to prove what Thomas has done and reclaim my company." "So what happens now?" Sadie asked, settling onto one of the rickety kitchen chairs. Robert spread the documents on the table. "Now we need to contact people I can trust. There aren't many, but there are a few who've been loyal to me for years." "Like who?" "Margaret Wilson, my executive assistant. She's been with me since I started the company. And Jessica Chen, a senior accountant who reports directly to me, not to the financial controller, who's aligned with Thomas. And there's Daniel Foster, head of legal. He's always been straight with me." Sadie considered this. "How will you contact them without your brother finding out?" "That's the tricky part," Robert admitted. "I can't use my phone or email. Thomas would be monitoring those. We need a way to reach out discreetly." They fell into thoughtful silence, each contemplating the challenge. Then Sadie's eyes lit up. "The library," she suggested. "Downtown. They have computers anyone can use. I could send messages from there." Robert frowned. "I can't show my face in public. Thomas might have people looking for me." "But I can go," Sadie countered. "You can tell me what to write, and I can send the messages for you." Robert considered the suggestion. It was risky but potentially workable. That might actually work. But we'd need to be careful about what we say. Nothing that would reveal too much if intercepted. Like a code? Sadie asked, excitement creeping into her voice. Exactly like a code, Robert agreed, finding himself smiling at her enthusiasm despite the gravity of the situation. They spent the next hour crafting careful messages for each of Robert's potential allies. For Margaret, a request to meet at the place where we celebrated the Peterson deal, a small, out-of-the-way cafe where they'd had coffee after the signing. For Jessica, a reference to the discrepancy in the Q2 reports, an issue only she and Robert had discussed. For Daniel, a mention of the contingency we discussed in February, a legal safeguard they'd put in place for exactly this type of situation. These people, Sadie said as she carefully wrote down each message. They're your friends? Robert considered the question. Colleagues, he corrected. In my world, true friends are rare. Business relationships are different. Sadie looked up from her notes. That sounds lonely. The simple observation caught Robert off guard. Was it lonely at the top? He had never thought about it that way. His life had been a relentless pursuit of success, with personal connections secondary at best. Even his marriage had faltered under the weight of his ambition. I suppose it is, he acknowledged, but it's the price of success. That's a pretty high price, Sadie remarked with the devastating honesty of a child. Robert had no response to that. Instead, he focused on finalizing their plan. Sadie would go to the library that afternoon to send the messages from a public computer. Then, if all went well, Margaret would meet them the following morning at the cafe, bringing information about what was happening at Blackwood Innovations in Robert's absence. As Sadie prepared to leave, Robert handed her a $100 bill from the cash in his waterproof bag. For your help, he explained. And for your family. Sadie stared at the money, clearly torn. Pride battled with practicality in her expression. I don't need payment for helping someone, she said finally. I know you don't, Robert replied gently. But your mother needs medicine, doesn't she? And your brother needs his asthma treatments. After a moment's hesitation, Sadie nodded and accepted the money, carefully folding it into the pocket of her worn jeans. Thank you, she said quietly. No, Sadie, Robert corrected her, his voice serious. Thank you. You've shown me more loyalty in one day than most people I've known for decades. After she left, Robert turned his attention to the documents she had recovered. The irony wasn't lost on him. The fate of his billion-dollar company now rested on the slender shoulders of a child who collected recyclables to help her family survive. And somehow he had more faith in her than in most of the executives he'd worked with throughout his career. Perhaps, he reflected, he had been measuring success by the wrong metrics all along. The Portland Central Library bustled with afternoon activity as Sadie slipped through the main entrance, her small frame easily navigating between adults absorbed in their own concerns. She had changed into her school clothes, a simple blue t-shirt and her least worn jeans, to blend in better. With her backpack slung over one shoulder, she looked like any other kid doing homework after school. Sadie made her way to the computer section, where a row of public terminals sat behind a half wall. She had used these computers before, mainly for school assignments when her teachers insisted on typed reports. Today's mission, however, was far more important than any homework. She waited patiently until a computer in the corner became available, then settled into the chair, keenly aware of the weight of responsibility Robert had placed on her. The messages they had crafted together were simple but specific, designed to alert Robert's trusted colleagues without revealing too much. With careful concentration, Sadie created a new email account under a name they had agreed upon, RB Recovery, and began sending the messages. Her fingers moved slowly but deliberately across the keyboard, making sure every word was exactly as Robert had instructed. To Margaret Wilson, need to discuss the Peterson file. Meet tomorrow, 9 a.m., where we celebrated the signing. Urgent. R. To Jessica Chen, remember the Q2 discrepancy we found? Need your expertise on similar situation. Contact this email ASAP. Discretion essential. R. To Daniel Foster, time to implement February's contingency plan. Contact this address immediately. Tell no one. After sending each message, Sadie deleted it from the sent folder and cleared the browser history as Robert had taught her. Then she logged out, gathered her things and left the library as inconspicuously as she had entered. The walk back to the abandoned house took 20 minutes, during which Sadie couldn't help glancing over her shoulder occasionally. Robert's paranoia was rubbing off on her, but she reminded herself that no one had any reason to follow a 10-year-old girl. When she returned, she found Robert poring over the documents from the waterproof bag, making notes on scraps of paper he had found in a kitchen drawer. "I sent them," she announced, dropping her backpack on a chair. "Just like you said." Robert looked up, relief evident in his tired eyes. "Any problems?" Sadie shook her head. "No one even noticed me." "That's my girl," Robert said, then caught himself. "I mean, that's excellent work, Sadie." A small smile played at the corners of Sadie's mouth. "It's okay. I know what you meant." Robert cleared his throat, slightly embarrassed by the slip of familiarity. "I've been going through these documents," he said, changing the subject. "They confirm what I suspected. Thomas has been planning this for months." He showed her a series of emails he'd printed out, pointing to specific exchanges. "See these dates?" Thomas started meeting secretly with board members back in January, planting seeds of doubt about my leadership. Sadie studied the papers with a serious expression, though much of the corporate language was beyond her understanding. "Why would they believe him over you?" "Isn't it your company?" "It was my company originally," Robert explained. "But as we grew, we brought in investors, added board members, distributed shares. I'm still the majority shareholder, but if enough board members unite against me, they can kick you out," Sadie finished for him. "Precisely." Robert nodded, impressed by her quick grasp of the situation. "Especially if they believe I'm unable to lead," Sadie frowned. "That's not fair." "Business rarely is," Robert replied with a wry smile. "But with these documents and the support of Margaret, Jessica, and Daniel, we can counter Thomas's move." As evening approached, Sadie reluctantly prepared to leave. "I need to check on Mom and make dinner for everyone," she explained. "But I'll come back first thing tomorrow to go with you to meet Margaret." Robert hesitated. "Sadie, I appreciate everything you've done, but tomorrow might be dangerous. If Thomas suspects anything—" "I'm coming with you," she said firmly, her young face set with determination. "You might need me. Besides, no one will suspect anything if they see you with a kid. They'll just think you're a dad out with his daughter." The logic was sound, and Robert found himself nodding. "All right, but at the first sign of trouble, you leave immediately. Promise me." "I promise," Sadie agreed, though her crossed fingers behind her back told a different story. The following morning dawned clear and crisp. Robert had barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. He had spent most of the night drafting a statement to the board, outlining Thomas's betrayal and asserting his rightful position as CEO. Sadie arrived at 8:15 a.m., wearing a clean dress and with her hair neatly combed. "Mom's having a good day," she explained when Robert commented on her appearance. "She helped me get ready. I told her I was meeting a friend to work on a school project." Robert had used some of his cash to purchase a baseball cap and sunglasses from a convenience store the previous evening, his makeshift disguise completed by Sadie's father's t-shirt and a pair of old jeans they'd found in a closet. He looked nothing like the polished CEO of Blackwood Innovations, which was precisely the point. Together, they made their way to Riverside Cafe, a small establishment several blocks from the Blackwood corporate headquarters. It was a place Robert had frequented when he wanted to escape the pressures of the office. Somewhere Thomas would never think to look for him. They arrived 15 minutes early and selected a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. Robert's nerves were on edge as he sipped a black coffee, while Sadie contentedly worked her way through a hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. At precisely 9 a.m., the cafe door opened and Margaret Wilson stepped inside. At 58, Margaret was a formidable presence, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and fiercely loyal to Robert after 15 years as his executive assistant. She scanned the cafe briefly, before her gaze settled on Robert's disguised figure, recognition flickering in her eyes. She approached their table calmly, betraying no outward surprise at Robert's appearance or his young companion. "Good morning," she said evenly, settling into the empty chair. "I received your message about the Peterson file." "Thank you for coming, Margaret," Robert replied, his voice low. "This is Sadie. She's been helping me through a difficult situation." Margaret nodded politely to Sadie, then turned her attention back to Robert. "You look terrible," she observed bluntly. "What happened?" In concise terms, Robert outlined the events of the past 2 days: Thomas's betrayal, his narrow escape from the river, Sadie's rescue, and their subsequent alliance. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grim. "I suspected something was wrong when Thomas called an emergency board meeting Friday evening," she said when Robert finished. "He told everyone you'd had a breakdown from stress and decided to take an extended sabbatical. He had medical documentation and everything." "Forged, obviously," Robert growled. "Obviously," Margaret agreed. "But convincing. He's been named interim CEO, effective immediately. The announcement goes public tomorrow morning. What about Jessica and Daniel? Have they responded to our messages?" Margaret shook her head. "Daniel's in Seattle for a conference. He won't be back until Wednesday. As for Jessica, she's been reassigned to the Tokyo office as of this morning. Very sudden. Thomas is isolating my allies," Robert realized, "moving them away from the center of power." "Precisely," Margaret confirmed. "He's been methodical. Anyone known to be loyal to you has been transferred, sent on business trips or placed on special projects away from headquarters." "What about you?" Sadie asked, speaking up for the first time. "Won't he be suspicious that you're not at work today?" Margaret smiled at the child's perceptiveness. "I called in sick. First time in 12 years. I doubt even Thomas would suspect anything." Robert leaned forward. "Margaret, I need to know who's still on my side. Who can we trust inside Blackwood?" Margaret considered the question. "Jennifer Hayes in legal. She's always respected you. William Chen in R&D. He's grateful that you backed his project when Thomas wanted to cut it. And possibly Diane Morgan in PR, though she tends to go with the prevailing wind." "Not a long list," Robert noted grimly. "No," Margaret agreed. "Thomas has been cultivating allies for months. Most of the executive team believes his version of events, or at least they're unwilling to challenge it. What about the Peterson acquisition? Is that still moving forward?" "For now. Thomas can't back out without causing serious legal issues, but he's already hinting that it might need to be re-evaluated in light of changing market conditions." Robert's jaw tightened. The Peterson acquisition was the future of Blackwood Innovations, the key to maintaining their competitive edge in an increasingly crowded market. If Thomas sabotaged it out of personal vendetta, years of work would be undone. "We need to move quickly," Robert decided, "before Thomas dismantles everything I've built." "What's the plan?" Margaret asked. Robert glanced at Sadie, who was listening intently while nursing the last of her hot chocolate. "We have documents proving Thomas has been planning this coup for months. Financial records showing he's been manipulating reports to undermine my position. Emails revealing his coordination with certain board members." "That's a start," Margaret acknowledged, "but we'll need more to counter the narrative he's created. Medical documentation, proving you're mentally fit. Witnesses who can testify to Thomas's actions. And most importantly, a way to present all this to the board before Thomas's position is fully solidified." "The annual shareholders' meeting," Robert said suddenly. "It's next Friday, isn't it?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, Thomas can't postpone it without raising serious red flags. Then that's our deadline. We have 1 week to gather everything we need and prepare our counterattack." As they discussed strategy, Sadie quietly observed the adults, absorbing their conversation. She noticed a man enter the cafe and take a seat near the door, his attention seemingly focused on his phone, but with occasional glances in their direction. "Robert," she whispered, interrupting the discussion. "That man by the door, he keeps looking at us." Robert and Margaret both tensed, carefully avoiding obvious stares in the man's direction. "Blue jacket, baseball cap?" Margaret murmured. Sadie nodded. "Security personnel," Margaret confirmed. "One of the new hires Thomas brought in last month. We need to leave separately." Robert quickly outlined a plan. Margaret would leave first, then Sadie, and finally Robert after a suitable interval. They would reconvene at the abandoned house in 1 hour. Margaret gathered her purse. "Don't worry," she said calmly. "We'll fix this." Then she stood and walked out, nodding politely to the security man as she passed. Sadie waited 5 minutes, then followed the script they had hastily created. "Bye, Uncle Jack," she said loudly. Thanks for helping with my history project. Any time, kiddo, Robert replied with a forced smile. Say hi to your mom for me. Sadie left, her heart pounding but her exterior calm. The security man barely glanced at her, just another kid leaving a cafe. She took a circuitous route back to the abandoned house, making sure no one was following her. Robert waited another 10 minutes before departing, keeping his head down and shoulders hunched to alter his distinctive posture. The security man looked up as he passed, but there was no flash of recognition in his eyes. By the time Robert reached the abandoned house, both Margaret and Sadie were waiting anxiously. I wasn't followed, he assured them as he closed the door behind him. Neither was I, Margaret confirmed. But it's clear Thomas is having people watch for you. That complicates things. It also confirms he knows I'm alive, Robert noted grimly. He's worried I might reappear. With good reason, Margaret said with a thin smile. She turned to Sadie. Sharp eyes, young lady. You may have saved us from a very unpleasant confrontation. Sadie beamed at the praise. What happens now? She asked, looking between the two adults. Robert and Margaret exchanged determined glances. Klaus, Robert said, we build our case. Can't we prepare to take back what's rightfully mine? The abandoned house transformed into an impromptu command center over the next 2 days. Margaret brought supplies, a laptop, prepaid phones, office materials, and, most importantly, inside information from Blackwood Innovations. She had decades of experience navigating corporate politics and knew exactly which documents would be most damaging to Thomas's fabricated narrative. Robert worked tirelessly, fueled by a combination of righteous anger and black coffee. He analyzed financial records, cross-referenced emails, and constructed a comprehensive timeline of Thomas's betrayal. The evidence was damning. Thomas had been systematically undermining Robert for months, manipulating reports, turning board members against him, and even falsifying medical assessments. Sadie, despite her youth, proved herself invaluable. She ran errands, kept watch outside the house for suspicious activity, and even contributed strategic insights that surprised the adults with their perception. Why don't you just call the police? She had asked on their second day of planning. What Thomas did was wrong. He should be arrested. Robert had exchanged glances with Margaret before responding. It's complicated, Sadie. Corporate disputes like this often exist in a gray area legally. Without concrete proof that Thomas intended to harm me physically, it becomes a he said situation. But he threw you in the river, and he would claim I fell accidentally, or that I jumped during a mental breakdown, which aligns with the narrative he's already created. Robert sighed. Our best approach is to focus on the corporate manipulation and fraud. That's where we have solid evidence. On Wednesday morning, Margaret arrived with a triumphant smile. Daniel Foster is back from Seattle. I spoke with him privately, and he's fully on our side. He's bringing legal documents that prove Thomas falsified your signature on several recent authorizations. Excellent, Robert said, his spirits lifting for the first time in days. When can he meet us? Tonight. He suggested the boat storage facility on the east side. His brother owns it, so it's secure. As they continued their work, Sadie sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously organizing printed emails by date. Robert couldn't help but notice her occasional yawns and the dark circles forming under her eyes. Sadie, he said gently, you should go home. Get some rest. You've been here since dawn. She shook her head stubbornly. I'm fine. There's too much to do. Robert knelt beside her, his voice softening. Your mother must be wondering where you've been spending all your time. I told her I'm working on a big school project with friends. Sadie wouldn't meet his eyes. But she's not having a good day anyway. The migraines are really bad this week. Robert felt a pang of guilt. In his absorption with reclaiming his company, he had almost forgotten the difficult reality Sadie returned to each night. Is there anything I can do to help? Does she have the medication she needs? The money you gave me helped, Sadie admitted. But the really good medicine, the one that actually works, costs a lot more. Robert made a mental note to address this situation once the current crisis was resolved. Go home, Sadie. Be with your family. We can handle things here for a few hours. After some persuasion, Sadie reluctantly agreed to leave, promising to return for the meeting with Daniel Foster that evening. Once she was gone, Margaret gave Robert a pointed look. You've grown quite attached to her. She saved my life, Robert replied defensively. It's more than that. Margaret had known Robert for 15 years, long enough to recognize when something had shifted in his usually guarded demeanor. She's changing how you see things. Robert couldn't deny it. Sadie's perspective, her simple, honest way of evaluating situations, had begun to influence his thinking. The world looked different through her eyes. Less about profit margins and market share, more about fundamental questions of right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal. Perhaps I needed that change, he acknowledged quietly. The afternoon passed in focused work. By 5 o'clock, they had compiled a compelling dossier exposing Thomas's machinations. Robert felt cautiously optimistic about their chances at the shareholders' meeting, though much still depended on Daniel Foster's legal expertise. Sadie returned at 6, carrying a small package wrapped in wax paper. Mom made sandwiches, she announced. She's feeling better today. The simple offering, homemade turkey sandwiches prepared by a struggling single mother for strangers she'd never met, touched Robert deeply. How long had it been since anyone had shown him such uncomplicated kindness? They ate quickly, then prepared for their meeting with Daniel. The boat storage facility was a 20-minute drive from their hideout, and Margaret had arranged for a rideshare service to pick them up from a nearby street corner to avoid revealing their exact location. Remember, Robert cautioned Sadie as they walked to the pickup spot, if anything seems wrong or dangerous tonight, you run. Don't worry about us. Just get yourself to safety. I'm not leaving you, Sadie insisted, her chin jutting out stubbornly. Robert recognized the futility of arguing with her. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder gratefully. Then stay close to me at all times. The rideshare driver, a middle-aged woman with a chatty disposition, seemed to assume they were a family, grandfather, mother, and daughter perhaps, heading home after an outing. Her casual conversation provided perfect cover for their tense silence. The boat storage facility loomed dark and utilitarian against the evening sky. A sign at the entrance read, Eastside Marine Storage Protected, 24/7. Though the security appeared to consist mainly of a padlocked gate and sparse queue. Lighting. Margaret approached the side entrance and punched a code into the keypad. The door unlocked with a metallic click. Daniel texted me the code, she explained as they entered. Inside, rows of boats in various states of maintenance stretched in every direction, creating a labyrinth of fiberglass and canvas. Their footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as they made their way to the office at the back, where a light glowed behind frosted glass. Daniel Foster rose from behind the desk as they entered. In his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he embodied the stereotypical image of a corporate attorney. His expression, however, was anything but stereotypical, a mixture of relief and righteous indignation at the sight of Robert. Thank God, he said, stepping forward to grasp Robert's hand firmly. When Thomas announced your sabbatical, I knew something was wrong. You've never taken a day off in 15 years, let alone a sudden extended leave. Thank you for believing in me, Daniel, Robert replied, genuinely moved by his lawyer's loyalty. Daniel's gaze shifted to Sadie, curiosity evident in his expression. And who might this be? This is Sadie, Robert said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. She saved my life, literally. As Margaret had done, Daniel accepted Sadie's presence without further question, recognizing that unusual circumstances called for unusual allies. He turned to the documents spread across the desk. I've been building a case since I got back from Seattle, he explained. Thomas made several key mistakes in his haste to seize control. He held up a folder. These are authorizations supposedly signed by you 3 days ago, when you were already missing. The signatures are decent forgeries, but they won't stand up to expert scrutiny. What about the medical documentation? Margaret asked. Thomas presented reports claiming Robert suffered a breakdown. Daniel nodded grimly. That's where things get interesting. The physician who supposedly conducted the evaluation doesn't exist, at least not under the name on the documents. It's a complete fabrication. Can we prove that? Robert asked. Absolutely. I've already had an investigator looking into it. Daniel pushed his glasses up his nose. Thomas got sloppy. He assumed no one would challenge his version of events. As the adults discussed legal strategies, Sadie wandered to the window overlooking the storage facility's main entrance. The conversation faded into background noise as she focused on something outside, a black SUV pulling up to the gate, its headlights extinguished. "Robert," she called urgently, interrupting the discussion. "Someone's here." The three adults joined her at the window. Through the darkness, they could make out two figures exiting the vehicle and approaching the main entrance. "Security patrol?" Margaret suggested hopefully. Daniel shook his head. "My brother doesn't employ night security. The facility is just locked after hours." They watched tensely as one of the figures entered a code at the main gate. To their alarm, the gate began to slide open. "How would they have the access code?" Daniel whispered. Robert's mind raced. "Thomas must have had me followed from the cafe after all. Or perhaps he's tracking Margaret's movements." "We need to leave," Margaret urged. "Now." Daniel led them quickly through a back door and into the maze of stored boats. "There's a service exit on the far side," he whispered, "if we can reach it without being seen." They moved as quietly as possible, using the boats as cover. Sadie stayed close to Robert, her small hand gripping his tightly. Despite the danger, Robert was struck by how calm she remained, as if navigating crisis situations had become her natural state. They had almost reached the service exit when floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire facility, bathing everything in harsh white light. A voice echoed through the storage area, amplified by a megaphone. "We know you're in here, Robert. There's nowhere to go." "Let's talk like civilized people," Thomas's voice. Robert felt rage surge through him, but Margaret grabbed his arm. "Don't," she warned. "That's exactly what he wants, to provoke you into doing something rash." Daniel pointed to a nearby speedboat covered in tarp. "Under there, quickly." They crouched beneath the tarp, the adults positioning themselves to shield Sadie. Through a small gap, Robert could see his brother walking calmly between the rows of boats, flanked by two security personnel. "This is childish, Robert," Thomas called out. "You're only delaying the inevitable. The board has already accepted your unfortunate condition. Fighting it will only make things worse for everyone." Robert's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent. Beside him, Sadie trembled slightly, though whether from fear or cold he couldn't tell. He put an arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Think about the company, Robert," Thomas continued, his voice echoing. "All these years of building Blackwood Innovations, do you really want to damage its reputation with a public fight? Come out now. Accept the generous retirement package I've prepared and we can keep this dignified." The footsteps grew closer to their hiding place. Robert could now see Thomas's expensive shoes through the gap in the tarp, mere feet away from where they huddled. Then, unexpectedly, a phone rang from the other side of the facility. Thomas paused, listening as one of his security team answered the call. After a brief conversation, the man approached Thomas. "Sir, there's been a breach at the office. The alarm in the executive suite has been triggered." Thomas hesitated, clearly torn between continuing the search and addressing this new development. "Fine," he said finally. "Secure the premises here and meet me back at headquarters." Robert and his companions remained motionless until the sound of the SUV's engine faded into the distance. Only then did they emerge from their hiding place, shaken but unharmed. "That was too close," Margaret whispered. Daniel checked his phone. "I don't understand." "There's no alert about an alarm at headquarters." A slow smile spread across Sadie's face as she pulled a small device from her pocket. "I called the security office," she admitted. "I used that voice app on your phone to make myself sound like a grown-up. I told them there was an emergency at the main building." The three adults stared at her in astonishment. "Quick thinking," Robert said finally, unable to suppress a proud smile. "We should go," Daniel urged. "They'll realize it was a false alarm soon enough." They exited through the service door and walked several blocks before calling another rideshare. The close encounter had rattled everyone, but it had also revealed a crucial weakness in Thomas's position. He was nervous. If he truly believed his takeover was legitimate and secure, he wouldn't be chasing Robert through the night, like a character in a thriller movie. Back at the abandoned house, they regrouped. Daniel had brought copies of all the legal documentation they would need for the shareholders' meeting, including the falsified authorizations and proof of their fraudulent nature. "We have enough to challenge Thomas legally," Daniel confirmed. But we need to be strategic about how and when we present this evidence. The shareholders' meeting is still our best opportunity, Robert insisted. Most of the board will be present, along with major investors. Thomas won't be able to control the narrative in that environment. As they continued planning, Sadie sat quietly in the corner, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Robert noticed her eyelids drooping and interrupted the discussion. "We should continue this tomorrow," he said firmly. "It's been a long day and Sadie needs to get home." Margaret offered to drive Sadie, but the girl shook her head. "Mom expects me to come home on my own. She'll worry if someone she doesn't know drops me off." "I'll walk with you part of the way," Robert decided, "just to make sure you get home safely." After Daniel and Margaret departed with plans to reconvene in the morning, Robert and Sadie set out into the night. They walked in comfortable silence for several blocks before Sadie spoke. "Your brother seems really determined to get rid of you." Robert sighed. "Thomas has always lived in my shadow. Our father started the original company, and I took it over when he retired. Thomas was always second in command, never quite measuring up in our father's eyes. I tried to mentor him, to include him in decisions, but he always saw it as condescension." "That's sad," Sadie observed, "being so angry at your own brother." "Yes," Robert agreed softly, "it is sad." They reached the edge of Sadie's neighborhood, a modest area of small houses and apartment buildings. Robert knew this was as far as he should go. His presence might raise questions Sadie couldn't easily answer. "Will you be okay from here?" he asked. Sadie nodded. "It's just 3 more blocks. I walk it every day." Robert hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew several $100 bills. "For your mother's medication," he said, pressing the money into her hand. "And don't argue, it's not charity. Here's payment for your exceptional security consulting services." Sadie smiled reluctantly as she accepted the money. "You're learning," she acknowledged. "From the best," Robert replied with genuine warmth. "I'll see you tomorrow. Be careful." As he watched her small figure disappear into the night, Robert reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A week ago, he had been at the pinnacle of corporate success, surrounded by luxury but isolated by position. Now he was hiding in an abandoned house, his fate tied to a child from the margins of society who had shown him more truth about human connection than decades in the boardroom ever had. And somehow, despite everything, he felt more alive than he had in years. Thursday morning brought unexpected news. Margaret arrived at the abandoned house with a newspaper in hand, her expression a mixture of concern and validation. "Thomas has gone public with your condition," she announced, spreading the business section on the table. The headline read, "Blackwood CEO takes medical leave amid concerns. Brother steps in." Robert scanned the article, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. According to the story, he had been exhibiting erratic behavior and suffering from exhaustion and stress-related symptoms before agreeing to an extended medical leave. Thomas was quoted expressing deep concern for his brother's well-being and pledging to maintain the company's trajectory during this difficult family time. "He's painting himself as the concerned brother," Robert said disgustedly, creating public sympathy while solidifying his position. "It was inevitable," Daniel observed, studying the article over Robert's shoulder. "By controlling the narrative publicly, he makes any counterclaims from you look like symptoms of your supposed breakdown." "But it might also be an opportunity," Margaret suggested. "Thomas clearly feels pressure to justify your absence. He wouldn't have gone to the press otherwise." Robert nodded slowly. "You're right. He's nervous about the shareholders' meeting tomorrow. This is a preemptive move to shape perception." Sadie arrived while they were discussing strategy, her face alight with excitement. "Mom's feeling much better today." "The new medicine is working." Robert smiled, momentarily distracted from the newspaper. "That's wonderful news, Sadie." She set her backpack down and joined them at the table, immediately noticing the serious atmosphere. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Margaret showed her the newspaper. Sadie read it with a furrowed brow, her young face growing increasingly indignant. "That's not fair. He's lying about you to everyone." "That's what adults sometimes do when they want power," Robert explained gently. "They create stories that benefit them, regardless of the truth." "Then we need to tell people the real story," Sadie insisted. "We have proof, right?" "We do," Daniel confirmed. But timing is crucial. If we respond too hastily, we risk looking desperate. If we wait too long, Thomas's version becomes accepted as fact. The shareholders' meeting is still our best opportunity, Robert maintained. But now we need to adjust our approach in light of this public statement. As they revised their strategy, a knock at the door froze everyone mid-conversation. They exchanged alarmed glances. No one was expected, and very few people knew of their hideout. "Sadie, go to the back room," Robert whispered urgently. The girl shook her head. "I'm staying with you." The knock came again, more insistent this time. Margaret moved to the window and carefully peered through a gap in the tattered curtains. "It's a woman," she reported. "I don't recognize her." Daniel cautiously approached the door. "Who's there?" he called. "Jessica Chen," came the reply. "I need to speak with Robert." Robert's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Jessica was the senior accountant they had attempted to contact, one of Robert's trusted employees who had supposedly been transferred to Tokyo. It could be a trap, Margaret warned. Robert considered the possibilities. "Let her in, but be ready for anything." Daniel opened the door a crack, then wider when he confirmed the visitor was indeed Jessica Chen. The young accountant entered quickly, glancing nervously over her shoulder, before Daniel secured the door behind her. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, obvious relief in her voice. "You're really here." I wasn't sure if the message was authentic. "Jessica," Robert greeted her, stepping forward. "I thought you were in Tokyo." "I was supposed to be," she confirmed. "But I called in sick at the last minute. Something about Thomas's story didn't add up, and then I received your message." She trailed off, noticing Sadie for the first time. "Who's this?" "A very important ally," Robert said simply. "What made you suspicious of Thomas's claims?" Jessica set her laptop on the table. "The numbers. When you disappeared, Thomas immediately initiated financial maneuvers that contradicted our established strategies. He authorized a series of transactions that individually looked legitimate, but collectively formed a pattern that troubled me." She opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. "Look at these fund transfers. Each one is just under the threshold requiring board approval, but together they total nearly $15 million moving into subsidiaries that Thomas personally oversees." Daniel leaned in, studying the screen. "He's siphoning funds under the guise of operational expenses." "Exactly," Jessica confirmed. "And there's more. Remember the preliminary valuation of Peterson Technologies? Thomas has been quietly instructing the assessment team to devalue their assets and question their patent viability. He's setting up the acquisition for failure," Robert realized, "so he can later justify abandoning it as a necessary course correction from my supposedly poor decision-making." Jessica nodded grimly. "I collected all the documentation I could before pretending to leave for Tokyo. I've been staying with my sister, waiting for the right moment to come forward." Robert felt a surge of gratitude. "You took a significant risk, Jessica. You gave me my first opportunity when no one else would," she replied simply. "I haven't forgotten that." With Jessica's financial evidence added to their arsenal, the case against Thomas grew substantially stronger. They spent the next few hours incorporating the new information into their presentation for the shareholders' meeting, creating a comprehensive picture of Thomas's betrayal and manipulation. As lunchtime approached, Sadie, who had been quietly observing the adults' work, tugged on Robert's sleeve. "I had an idea," she said hesitantly. "What is it? What if I went to talk to your brother?" The room fell silent as all four adults stared at her in disbelief. "Absolutely not," Robert said firmly. "Just hear me out," Sadie persisted. "He doesn't know who I am. I could pretend to be selling something, like cookies for school or something, and get inside the building. I could see what he's doing, maybe even hear something important." "It's too dangerous," Margaret objected. "Thomas wouldn't suspect a child," Sadie argued. "That's why it would work." Robert knelt to her level, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Sadie, I appreciate your courage and creativity, but I can't let you put yourself at risk. Thomas is desperate, which makes him unpredictable. If he discovered your connection to me—" Sadie sighed, clearly disappointed but accepting the decision. "I just want to help." "You already have," Robert assured her. "More than you know." As they continued working, Robert noticed Sadie growing increasingly quiet. Her usual energy dimmed. During a brief break, he sat beside her on the worn couch. "Is everything okay?" Beyond our current situation, I mean. Sadie hesitated. My mom wants to know why I'm spending so much time away from home. I'm running out of excuses about school projects. Robert realized he had been so focused on his own crisis that he hadn't fully considered the strain it was placing on Sadie's family life. Would it help if I met your mother? I could explain that you've been helping me with community service work. Sadie's eyes widened. You would do that? Of course. We could say I'm a volunteer coordinator, and you've been assisting with a neighborhood improvement project. The idea clearly appealed to Sadie, but then her expression clouded. But what if someone recognizes you? Your picture was in the newspaper. Robert touched his now scruffy beard grown over the past several days. With his casual clothes and disheveled appearance, he barely resembled the polished executive from the business section photo. I think we can risk it. Your mum deserves to know you're safe and doing something worthwhile. They arranged to visit Sadie's home that evening. Margaret and Daniel would continue preparing for the shareholders' meeting, while Jessica would compile additional financial evidence from her remote access to the company's accounting system. At 6 o'clock, Robert and Sadie walked the 15 minutes to her family's modest apartment in a worn but dignified building on the east side. Sadie grew increasingly animated as they approached, pointing out landmarks from her daily life, the corner store where she sometimes bought penny candy, the playground where her younger siblings played, the community center that offered free lunches during summer. It's not much, she said self-consciously as they climbed the stairs to the third floor. Not like what you're used to. Sometimes the most important things aren't things at all, Robert replied, surprising himself with the sentiment that would have seemed trite to him just a week ago. Sadie unlocked the apartment door, calling out, Mom, I'm home. I brought someone I want you to meet. The apartment was small but meticulously clean, furnished with well-worn but cared-for items. A few children's drawings adorned the refrigerator, and small touches, a vase of wildflowers, handmade curtains, gave the space a sense of home that Robert's luxurious mansion had always lacked. Ellen Miller emerged from a back room, a woman in her mid-30s whose once pretty face showed the strain of years of struggle. Her eyes, however, were kind and intelligent, immediately reminding Robert of Sadie's perceptive gaze. Mom, this is Mr. Jackson, Sadie said, using the alias they had agreed upon. He runs the community improvement project I've been helping with. Robert extended his hand. Miss Miller, it's a pleasure to meet you. Sadie has been an extraordinary help with our neighborhood beautification efforts. Ellen shook his hand, her expression a mixture of curiosity and maternal concern. Sadie's been very mysterious about this project. I was starting to worry. I apologize for that, Robert said sincerely. We've been so busy that I didn't realize she hadn't fully explained the situation to you. From the back of the apartment came the sound of children's voices, and 2 younger children appeared. A boy of about 8 with Sadie's thoughtful eyes, and a little girl of 5 with pigtails and a missing front tooth. These are my brother and sister, Sadie introduced them. Jason and Emma. The children regarded Robert with open curiosity before Emma asked bluntly, Are you Sadie's boyfriend? Robert chuckled while Sadie turned bright red. No, Emma, he's my teacher, for the special project. Ellen invited Robert to stay for dinner, an invitation he accepted with genuine pleasure. The meal was simple, spaghetti with meat sauce and a side of garlic bread. But the atmosphere around the table was something Robert had rarely experienced. Warm, genuine family connection. Jason peppered Robert with questions about his supposed community project, forcing him to elaborate on their cover story. Emma insisted on showing him her collection of rocks and feathers, treasures she had gathered from the neighborhood park. Throughout it all, Ellen watched with a mother's careful assessment, gradually relaxing as she observed the respectful way Robert interacted with her children. After dinner, while Sadie helped the younger children with homework, Ellen invited Robert to join her for coffee in the small kitchen. I want to thank you, she said quietly, pouring him a cup from a chipped but clean mug. Sadie has seemed different these past few days, more confident, more purposeful. She's an extraordinary young person, Robert replied truthfully. Wise beyond her years, Ellen smiled sadly. She's had to be. Since her father left, she's taken on responsibilities no child should have to bear. She hesitated. The money for my new medication. That came from your project, didn't it? Robert didn't deny it. Sadie mentioned you were having health issues. The stipend was the least we could do for her valuable assistance. Ellen's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You have no idea what a difference it's made. For the first time in months, I can function without debilitating pain. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Thank you for whatever you're really doing that has brought my daughter home each day with purpose in her eyes. The simple gratitude struck Robert deeply. In his corporate life, transactions were complex, motivations often hidden behind layers of agenda. Here in this humble kitchen was something he had almost forgotten existed: straightforward human connection. Your daughter has helped me more than you know, he said softly. She's reminded me of what truly matters. As Robert prepared to leave, promising to have Sadie home at a reasonable hour the following day, he found himself reluctant to return to the abandoned house and the corporate machinations awaiting him there. For a brief evening, he had glimpsed a different kind of wealth than the one he had spent his life accumulating. Sadie walked him partway back, uncharacteristically quiet in the gathering dusk. Your family is lovely, Robert said finally, breaking the silence. You're very fortunate. We don't have much, Sadie replied. Not like you. You have everything that matters, Robert corrected her. Love, loyalty, connection. I've spent decades building a fortune and a reputation, but I never created a home like yours. Sadie considered this. You could, though. It's not too late. The simple observation, delivered with a child's certainty, stirred something in Robert's heart. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps after reclaiming his company, he could focus on building the aspects of life he had long neglected. You're very wise. Sadie Miller, he said, smiling down at her. I know, she replied with a cheeky grin, the serious moment broken. That's why you need me. When they returned to the abandoned house, they found the others still working diligently. Jessica had uncovered additional financial irregularities, strengthening their case further. Daniel had prepared legal documents to file immediately after the shareholders' meeting, and Margaret had created a detailed plan for Robert's public re-emergence. Everything's falling into place, Daniel announced. Tomorrow we take back what's yours. Robert nodded, but his thoughts remained partially with the Miller family. Yes, tomorrow he would reclaim his company and his position, but he was beginning to realize that the most valuable thing he had gained during this ordeal wasn't measured in stock options or corporate titles. It was the lesson taught by a 10-year-old girl who had nothing yet everything, that true wealth came from human connection, loyalty, and purpose beyond profit margins. Tomorrow would be about justice and vindication, but the day after would be about something even more important, a second chance to build a life of genuine meaning. Friday morning dawned bright and clear, the September sun casting long shadows across Portland. In the abandoned house, tension hung in the air as final preparations were made for the shareholders' meeting, scheduled for 10 a.m. at Blackwood Innovations headquarters. Robert stood before a cracked mirror in the bathroom, carefully shaving away his week-old beard. Margaret had brought him a crisp white shirt, charcoal suit, and blue tie, his signature look as CEO. As he transformed from disheveled fugitive back into Robert Blackwood, corporate leader, he studied his reflection with mixed emotions. The face looking back at him was familiar yet different. The eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, a humanity born from days of vulnerability and unexpected friendship with a child who had shown him the meaning of true loyalty. You look like yourself again, Margaret observed from the doorway. Do I? Robert adjusted his tie. I'm not sure I am the same person anymore. Margaret smiled knowingly. That might be for the best. Daniel arrived with updated intelligence. Security at Blackwood headquarters had been increased for the shareholders' meeting, Thomas clearly anticipating some form of confrontation. Jessica reported that the board members were already gathering in the executive conference room for pre-meeting discussions. What about Sadie? Robert asked, looking around. She should be here by now. Perhaps she's running late, Margaret suggested, or maybe she decided to stay home today. This will be a tense situation, not really appropriate for a child. Robert frowned. That's not like her. She would have told us if she wasn't coming. A phone chimed, one of the prepaid devices they had been using for secure communications. Daniel checked the message, his expression growing concerned. It's from Jessica's contact in the building. Thomas has moved the meeting up to 9:30. We have less time than we thought. We need to leave now, Margaret urged. We can't wait for Sadie. Robert hesitated, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. It wasn't like Sadie to break a promise. Something felt wrong. I'll try calling her home, he decided, dialing the Miller's number on the prepaid phone. After several rings, Ellen answered. Hello? Mrs. Miller, this is... Jack, Robert said, remembering his alias. Is Sadie there? She was supposed to meet me this morning. Sadie left over an hour ago, Ellen replied, confusion evident in her voice. She said she was meeting you early to prepare for some special presentation. Robert's unease deepened. Thank you. I'm sure we just missed each other. I'll find her. After hanging up, he shared the information with the others. Something's wrong. Sadie left home early specifically to meet us. Could she have gone to the wrong place? Daniel suggested. No, she knows this location well. Robert paced the small room. What if Thomas somehow discovered her connection to me? What if she's been... He couldn't finish the thought. Let's not jump to conclusions, Margaret said reasonably. There could be a simple explanation. But right now we need to focus on the shareholders' meeting. We're running out of time. Robert knew she was right, but the thought of proceeding without knowing Sadie was safe troubled him deeply. Nevertheless, they had to move forward with their plan. The car Margaret had arranged was waiting outside, ready to take them to Blackwood headquarters for their confrontation with Thomas. As they gathered their documents and prepared to leave, the back door suddenly burst open. Sadie stood in the doorway, breathless and disheveled, her normally neat ponytail coming loose and dirt smudging her cheek. Sadie! Robert rushed to her. What happened? Are you all right? I'm fine, she gasped, trying to catch her breath. But we have a problem. I overheard something important. The adults exchanged glances as Sadie continued, words tumbling out rapidly. I was walking here this morning when I saw your brother's car, the black one from the boat place, parked outside a coffee shop. I recognized it from that night. And I thought maybe I could hear something useful. Sadie, Robert interrupted, his voice stern with concern. You promised you wouldn't put yourself in danger. I was careful, she insisted. I just sat at the table next to him and pretended to be waiting for my mom. He was talking to a woman about the shareholders' meeting. They didn't notice me at all. What did you hear? Daniel asked, professional interest overriding his concern. Thomas is planning to announce a merger today, Sadie reported, with some company called Granite Global. He said it would make his position unassailable and that the shareholders would be ecstatic about the premium. The three adults stared at her in shock, immediately grasping the significance of this information. Granite Global has been trying to acquire Blackwood for years, Margaret explained to Sadie. We've always refused their offers because they would dismantle our research division and eliminate hundreds of jobs. Thomas is selling out the company, Robert said grimly. Once that merger is announced, it will be nearly impossible to unwind, even if we expose his fraud. The meeting starts in 40 minutes, Daniel checked his watch. We need to move now. Their driver took them through Portland's morning traffic with urgent speed. Robert sat silently, processing this new development. Thomas wasn't just trying to take his position. He was planning to sell the very company their father had founded, the innovation hub Robert had spent his life building. Why would he do this? Sadie asked from beside him, sensing his distress. Money, Robert replied simply. As CEO negotiating the merger, Thomas would receive an enormous payout. And he'd no longer have to live in my shadow. There would be no company left to run. As they approached Blackwood headquarters, a sleek glass and steel building dominating the skyline, Robert turned to Sadie. You should wait in the car, he said firmly. This confrontation could get ugly. To his surprise, Sadie didn't argue. I know. This is your fight now. She reached for his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. But I'll be waiting, and I believe in you. The simple statement, delivered with absolute conviction, steadied Robert's resolve. He squeezed her hand gratefully before exiting the car with Margaret and Daniel. Security at the main entrance was tight, as expected. The guard at the desk did a double-take when he recognized Robert. Mr. Blackwood? Sir, we weren't told you would be attending today. It's my company, Robert replied coolly. I don't need an invitation. The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain how to proceed. "Sir, I should call upstairs." Margaret stepped forward. "That won't be necessary. Board policy clearly states that the CEO has unrestricted access to all company facilities at all times. Unless that policy has been officially changed by board vote?" The guard, intimidated by Margaret's authoritative tone, reluctantly stepped aside. "No, ma'am. Not that I'm aware of." They proceeded to the elevator, aware that word of Robert's arrival would reach Thomas within minutes. The executive conference room was on the top floor, with panoramic views of the city and the distant mountains. "Remember the plan," Daniel murmured as the elevator ascended. "Let me establish the legal foundation before you present the evidence. We need to control the narrative from the moment we enter." The elevator doors opened directly into the reception area outside the conference room. Through the glass walls, Robert could see the meeting already in progress. Thomas stood at the head of the table, gesturing toward a presentation displayed on the large screen behind him. Board members and major shareholders sat around the table, approximately 20 people in total. The receptionist gasped when she saw Robert. "Mr. Blackwood, but you're—" "Taking back my company," Robert finished for her, striding past toward the conference room doors. He paused for just a moment, hand on the door handle, gathering his strength for the confrontation ahead. Then, with purposeful calm, he pushed the doors open and walked in. The room fell instantly silent. Thomas froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he stared at the brother he had believed eliminated from the equation. The board members turned in their seats, expressions ranging from shock to confusion to, in a few cases, poorly concealed relief. "Robert," Thomas recovered quickly, forcing a concerned smile. "This is unexpected. You should be resting, recovering." "I'm fully recovered, thank you," Robert replied evenly, moving to the center of the room. Margaret and Daniel flanked him, projecting a united front. "In fact, I'm ready to resume my duties as CEO, effective immediately." A murmur ran through the assembled shareholders. Thomas's smile tightened. "Robert, we all understand your desire to return, but your health must come first. The doctors were quite clear about your condition." "What doctors would those be, Thomas?" Daniel interjected smoothly. "Dr. Lawrence Phillips, perhaps? The physician whose name appears on the medical documentation you presented to the board?" He opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "I've taken the liberty of checking with the Oregon Medical Board. No Dr. Lawrence Phillips is licensed in this state, nor does anyone by that name have admitting privileges at any hospital in the Portland metropolitan area." Another, louder murmur swept the room. Thomas's face flushed. "There must be some mistake," he insisted. "The medical reports were thorough and verified." "Verified by whom?" Margaret asked pointedly. "Certainly not by the board's usual medical consultants." Robert stepped forward. "Members of the board, valued shareholders, I stand before you today not as someone suffering from stress or mental instability, but as the victim of a calculated coup attempt." His voice remained steady, authoritative. "My brother has systematically misled you, falsified documents, and manipulated company finances to serve his personal agenda." "That's absurd," Thomas sputtered. "Robert is clearly delusional." "Then explain these," Daniel interrupted, distributing copies of the documents they had compiled. Falsified authorizations bearing Robert's forged signature, dated during the period of his supposed sabbatical. Financial transfers just under the board approval threshold, moving millions into subsidiaries under Thomas's direct control. And communications with Granite Global beginning 3 months ago, negotiating the very merger you were about to announce today. The board members began examining the documents with growing concern. Thomas looked increasingly cornered. "Thomas didn't just try to take my position," Robert continued. "He physically attacked me and left me in the Willamette River, believing I wouldn't survive to challenge his version of events." Gasps echoed around the table. Harold Winters, the eldest board member and a friend of their father's, looked up from the documents with horror. "Is this true, Thomas?" "First, of course not," Thomas snapped. "Robert is making up wild stories to cover his mental breakdown. He disappeared for days. Where have you been, Robert, if not receiving treatment?" "Gathering evidence," Robert replied calmly, "and recovering from the attempt on my life. Fortunately, I was rescued by someone whose moral compass is more functional than yours. Jessica Chen, who had been waiting in the wings, now entered the room carrying additional financial documentation. "The company books have been systematically manipulated," she announced, placing her evidence before the board chairman. "I've highlighted the discrepancies. The pattern is unmistakable." Thomas looked from face to face, realizing he was losing control of the situation. His expression hardened from defensive to coldly angry. "This is all very dramatic, Robert. Always the showman, aren't you?" He turned to the board. Even if there were irregularities in how Robert's leave was documented, the fact remains that Blackwood Innovations needs stable leadership. Robert disappeared for days without explanation. His behavior has been erratic for months, ever since the Peterson acquisition, a move that has cost us millions with no tangible return. "The Peterson acquisition was visionary," Robert countered. "Their AI technology will revolutionize our entire product line. The early tests have exceeded all projections." "The market disagrees," Thomas shot back. "Our stock has been stagnant since the announcement." "Because you've been deliberately undermining the integration," Jessica interjected. "Reassigning key personnel, cutting research budgets, delaying implementation timelines." Robert addressed the board directly. "Thomas opposed the Peterson acquisition from the beginning. When it proved successful, validating my vision rather than his, he chose to destroy what he couldn't control." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Is that the kind of leadership Blackwood Innovations deserves?" Harold Winters stood up slowly. As the senior board member, his opinion carried significant weight. "I've heard enough. I move that we immediately reinstate Robert as CEO and launch a full investigation into these allegations against Thomas." "I second the motion," said Victoria Reyes, another long-standing board member. Thomas looked around desperately. "The merger with Granite Global would increase shareholder value by 30%. Are you willing to throw that away based on unsubstantiated accusations?" "At what cost?" Robert challenged. "Granite would dismantle our research division, eliminate hundreds of jobs, and liquidate our most innovative projects. The short-term gain would destroy everything we've built." The board chairman called for a vote. One by one, the members indicated their position. The outcome was decisive. Robert would be reinstated immediately, and an independent investigation would examine Thomas's actions. Thomas stared at his brother, naked hatred in his eyes. "You've always been the golden boy, haven't you? Father's favorite, the board's darling, the visionary everyone admires." His voice dripped with bitterness. "No matter what I do, how hard I work, I'll always be second best to the great Robert Blackwood." "It was never a competition, Thomas," Robert replied softly. "That was always your perspective, not mine." "Security will escort you from the building," the chairman informed Thomas. "Your access to all company systems and facilities is revoked, effective immediately." As two security officers entered to lead Thomas away, he turned back to Robert. "This isn't over. You haven't heard the last from me." After Thomas was removed, the meeting continued with Robert officially resuming his position as CEO. He thanked the board for their trust and outlined immediate steps to stabilize the company and address the disruption caused by Thomas's brief tenure. Throughout the proceedings, Robert maintained his professional demeanor, but his thoughts repeatedly drifted to Sadie, waiting in the car below. She had been instrumental in this victory, yet would receive no recognition from the corporate world that had just witnessed a power struggle of Shakespearean proportions. When the meeting finally adjourned, Robert found himself surrounded by board members and executives, offering congratulations and expressing shock at Thomas's actions. He accepted their words graciously, but extricated himself as quickly as possible. "I have an important meeting," he explained to Margaret as he headed for the elevator. "Someone who deserves my thanks more than anyone in that room." Margaret smiled knowingly. "Go, I'll handle things here." Robert found Sadie exactly where he had left her, sitting patiently in the car, her face lighting up when she saw him approach. "Did it work?" she asked eagerly as he slid into the seat beside her. "It worked," he confirmed, unable to suppress a smile at her excitement. "Thomas has been removed and I've been reinstated as CEO." Sadie threw her arms around him in an impulsive hug. "I knew you could do it." Robert returned the embrace, this corporate victory somehow feeling more meaningful when shared with this remarkable child than any he had achieved before. "We did it together," he corrected her. I couldn't have done it without you, Sadie. As the car pulled away from Blackwood headquarters, Robert felt the weight of the past week finally lifting. Justice had been served, his company secured. But the greatest revelation had nothing to do with corporate power or vindication. It was the realization that a 10-year-old girl from the wrong side of town had taught one of Portland's most powerful men the true meaning of loyalty, courage and friendship, lessons no business school could ever impart, and values no corporate success could ever replace. 1 month after the dramatic shareholders' meeting, life at Blackwood Innovations had largely returned to normal. Robert had resumed his leadership role with renewed purpose, guiding the company through the turbulence left in Thomas's wake. The Peterson acquisition was proceeding successfully, with early implementation of their AI technology already yielding promising results. Thomas had left Portland shortly after his removal, reportedly traveling to Europe to reassess his priorities. The investigation into his actions continued, but Robert had insisted on handling the matter discreetly, mindful of their father's legacy and the family name. On a crisp October morning, Robert stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his restored office, gazing out at the Portland skyline. The familiar trappings of corporate success surrounded him once again: the elegant furniture, the sophisticated technology, the deferential staff. Yet something felt different. He felt different. A knock at the door interrupted his reflection. Margaret entered, tablet in hand. The Peterson integration team is ready for you in conference room A, she reminded him, and the quarterly projections need your review by end of day. Thank you, Margaret. Robert turned from the window. Before we dive into all that, has there been any update on the Miller situation? Margaret smiled. Everything is proceeding as you instructed. The paperwork should be finalized by the end of the week. Excellent. And the other arrangements? All taken care of. The contractor begins work on Monday. Robert nodded, satisfied. Let's not keep the Peterson team waiting. The meeting ran efficiently, with Robert offering strategic guidance while encouraging the team to think independently. Several times during the discussion, he found himself channeling Sadie's perspective, asking the simple, direct questions that often revealed the clearest path forward. Her influence on his leadership style had not gone unnoticed by those who worked closely with him. You've changed, Jessica Chen observed after the meeting, as they walked back toward the executive offices. Since everything that happened. For the better, I hope, Robert replied. Definitely, Jessica confirmed. You listen more. You see the human element in decisions, not just the financial implications. Robert smiled, knowing exactly who deserved credit for that transformation. After a full day of corporate responsibilities, Robert left the office earlier than had once been his habit. His driver took him not to his mansion in the West Hills, but to a modest neighborhood on the east side of the river. The car stopped in front of a small, newly renovated house with a freshly painted blue door and flower boxes beneath the windows. Sadie was waiting on the porch steps, jumping up when she spotted his car. She bounded down to meet him, her face alight with excitement. Did you bring it? Did the judge sign the papers? Robert pulled an envelope from his suit jacket. See for yourself. Sadie tore open the envelope and scanned the document inside, her expression transitioning from anticipation to pure joy. It's official. We really own it. You and your family really own it, Robert corrected her gently. Fair and square. The house had been Robert's solution to the Miller family's precarious living situation. Rather than simply giving them money, which he knew Ellen's pride would resist, he had created a legitimate arrangement. Ellen had been hired as Blackwood Innovations' new wellness program coordinator, a position that utilized her nursing background to support employee health initiatives. The job came with excellent healthcare benefits, solving the problem of her expensive medication. Part of her compensation package included this house, offered at a significant discount through a company home ownership program Robert had created specifically for this purpose. Ellen was making payments she could afford, maintaining her dignity and independence while providing security for her children. The front door opened and Ellen appeared, smiling warmly at Robert. Just in time for dinner, she called. Jason and Emma have been asking when you'd arrive. Inside, the house was modestly but comfortably furnished. The living room featured a new couch and educational toys for the children, The kitchen had been updated with reliable appliances. Most importantly, every room reflected the Miller family's personality. Artwork by the children, Ellen's handmade curtains, family photos in simple frames. "Mom made your favorite," Sadie informed Robert as they entered. "Pot roast with those fancy potatoes." "Rosemary potatoes," Ellen corrected with a laugh. "Hardly fancy, but Robert seems to enjoy them." Dinner with the Millers had become a weekly tradition that Robert treasured. The simple family meals, filled with genuine conversation and laughter, provided a warmth his life had previously lacked. Jason updated him on science fair projects, Emma showed him new drawings, and Sadie regaled everyone with observations about the world that were both insightful and amusing. After dinner, while Ellen helped the younger children with homework, Robert and Sadie sat on the back porch steps. The small backyard featured a newly installed swing set and a garden plot where Ellen planned to grow vegetables come spring. "The program at school is working out really well," Sadie told him. "My teacher says I might be able to skip a grade if I keep up my current progress." The educational enrichment program was another of Robert's quiet interventions. Recognizing Sadie's exceptional intelligence, he had funded an expanded gifted program at her school, benefiting not only her but dozens of other children with untapped potential. "That's wonderful," Robert said sincerely. "Though I'm not surprised. You're the smartest person I know, regardless of age." Sadie beamed at the compliment. "How's the company doing? Is the Peterson stuff working out?" Robert chuckled at her business acumen. "Very well. Their AI technology is exceeding expectations. Stock price is up 17% since integration began." "And what about Thomas? Have you heard from him?" Robert's expression sobered. "He's still in Europe. I received a brief email last week, the first communication since everything happened. He seems reflective. Do you think he'll ever come back? Perhaps someday. When he's ready to face what he did, and I'm ready to consider forgiveness." Sadie considered this thoughtfully. "Forgiveness is hard, but I think it's worth it in the end." "When did you get so wise?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. Sadie had always possessed wisdom beyond her years, forged in the crucible of early responsibility and uncomplaining sacrifice. "I learned from the best," she replied with a cheeky grin, bumping her shoulder against his arm. As twilight deepened around them, Robert reflected on the journey that had brought him to this porch step. The betrayal that had nearly cost him everything had paradoxically given him something more valuable than corporate success, a surrogate family, a deeper perspective on what truly mattered, and a purpose beyond profit margins. Blackwood Innovations was thriving under his renewed leadership, the Peterson acquisition proving even more valuable than anticipated. But Robert had made subtle yet significant changes to the company culture. Work-life balance was now emphasized. Community engagement had increased. The corporate mission statement had been revised to highlight not just innovation and profit, but responsibility and human impact. These changes hadn't gone unnoticed. Business publications were writing about the new Robert Blackwood, speculating about the reasons for his evolved approach. Some attributed it to his near brush with losing everything. Others suggested the dramatic confrontation with his brother had sparked personal reflection. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that a child who collected recyclables along the riverbank had taught one of Portland's most powerful men the meaning of true value. "You should come to Career Day at my school," Sadie suggested suddenly. "Tell everyone about running a big company." "I'd be honored," Robert replied, "though I suspect I'd learn more from your classmates than they would from me." "Now you're just being silly," Sadie laughed. Later that evening, as Robert prepared to leave, Ellen walked him to the door. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to thank you properly," she said quietly. "Not just for the job and the house, but for seeing Sadie's potential, for valuing her." "I should be thanking her," Robert replied honestly. "She saved more than my life that day by the river. She saved my humanity." Ellen smiled knowingly. "She has that effect on people." As Robert's car pulled away from the Miller home, he found himself contemplating the future with a sense of purpose that transcended business goals. The Peterson technology was just the beginning. Blackwood Innovations had the potential to create solutions that genuinely improved lives, medical applications, educational tools, environmental technologies. And alongside these professional aspirations, Robert was nurturing personal growth as well. He had begun the process of establishing a foundation focused on supporting children from underprivileged backgrounds, ensuring that brilliant minds like Sadie's wouldn't be limited by economic circumstances. The Riverside Opportunity Foundation, named for the location of his fateful rescue, would provide educational resources, mentorship, and family support services. Back at his mansion in the West Hills, Robert wandered through the expansive, elegantly decorated rooms that had once represented the pinnacle of success in his mind. Now they felt oddly empty, devoid of the warmth he had experienced in the miller's modest home. On an impulse, he called his real estate agent. "Janet, I've been thinking about downsizing. Something closer to downtown, perhaps. More practical, less ostentatious." The change would be significant, but then significant change had become the theme of Robert's life since that morning by the river. The corporate titan who had once measured success in acquisitions and profit margins now found greater satisfaction in Friday dinners with a family that had adopted him into their circle, in mentoring a brilliant young girl whose potential knew no bounds, and in reshaping his company to serve a purpose beyond wealth accumulation. 6 months after the day Sadie Miller pulled him from the Willamette River, Robert stood on a stage at Portland Community College, addressing the inaugural class of Riverside Scholars, 50 students from underprivileged backgrounds who had demonstrated exceptional potential. "Success isn't measured by what you accumulate," he told them, his gaze finding Sadie in the front row beaming with pride. "It's measured by the lives you touch, the positive change you create, and the legacy of compassion you leave behind." As applause filled the auditorium, Robert reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this moment. A betrayal meant to destroy him had instead led to redemption. A child with nothing had shown him the true meaning of everything, and a life once defined by corporate achievement had been transformed into something far richer, a life of purpose, connection, and genuine impact. In the most unexpected way, through the most unlikely ally, Robert Blackwood had lost an empire and found a home.